Rhino Geek. What's up, brother?
Hey man, good to see you. Been a while.
Yeah, it's been we took last month off.
Yeah, we haven't taken. I think that's the only second month we've taken off.
I think
whatever,
so,
2
man.
years.
Yep. So we've earned it. You've earned it.
Yeah.
I don't take time off. You take time off.
You earned it way more than me. You're on these things like nonstop.
Well, I'm psyched for the show today, and even more psyched to have our special guest, our very, very good friend, Vince Horn. Vince, what's up, buddy?
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here.
Yeah.
We've Ryan and I have actually been talking, geez, pretty much since we started the show.
Yeah.
When was that, Ryan? Like 2 years ago. We're like,
Yeah.
we gotta get Vincent here with us.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
Finally worked out.
yeah, man. I'm glad you joined.
Great to be here.
We've got the Buddhist Geeks in the house.
Yeah,
Officially in uniform.
Yeah, we got uniform. I wasn't informed. I'm the integral geek, I guess. That works for me.
We're accepting memberships and we have Kool-Aid.
No, so this is gonna be a fun show. Vince, the reason why we wanted to have you on was because well, let's just kind of take it from the top. Ryan, you sent me a message about 2 months ago letting me know that you actually took a fairly big step in your ongoing
Vince did it too. We did it together.
Oh, you guys did it together.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that big event was you guys took the Bodhisattva Vow.
Indeed.
Yes.
That's
Or the Bodhisattva Vow, depending on how you look at it. Since we are a couple of
bros, yeah.
enlightened bros.
Yes, I love it. And I figured that let's wrap an episode around this because it's such a fascinating topic. I think from so many angles, both in terms of like personally what drove you guys to take the vow in the first place, but also just kind of generally how this vow is sort of enacted and expressed at multiple altitudes. You guys, I'm assuming, are coming from a vaguely teal or turquoise altitude on a good day, maybe. So I'm going to be really curious to hear you guys talk about just how that changes things, if it changes things. Ken often talks about how when it comes to the non-dual awakened experience, well, there's sort of two sides of the ledger there. There's an emptiness side of the street, which by its very definition doesn't change, doesn't move. It's the same emptiness now that was there ever since before the Big Bang. And yet the other sort of side of the equation, if we can call it equation, because this is non-duality and you can't talk about it without sounding like Yoda the entire time. But if you can excuse my dualism here, on the other side of the street is the world of form that is constantly changing, constantly evolving in all four quadrants. And so I'm going to be really curious to hear from you guys, how this Bodhisattva vow lands for you, the sort of meaning that it's generating for you, and really what makes it a little bit different taking this vow here in the 21st century, as opposed to, let's say like 14th century Japan or something like that. So this is going to be a rich and fun conversation, and an important one too, because I think that this, connects us to a sense of, let's just call it divine purpose. I think that one of the common themes that we talk about in shows like this is how, we are really swimming in sort of the shallow waters of a epistemic crisis of meaning, right? Meaning has been in such short supply for so many people, and that creates this sort of cynical malaise that I think all of us, awakened or otherwise, participate with in some way. Right? We're surrounded by this malaise one way or the other. And, to me, you guys taking the Bodhisattva vow, it feels to me anyway, that you have sort of decided to bend your life, to bend your very core around a premise and a principle that generates an incredible amount of meaning, both for you guys personally, as well as in the world at large. So that's sort of a buffet line of topics that we can get into in this discussion. But let's start, Ryan. Let's start with you. I want to hear from you. What compelled you to take the Bodhisattva vow in the first place? And then Vince, I'd like you to answer that question as well. So what sort of was the process that led you to making this decision?
Well, I mean, for me, and I imagine this is similar for Vince, that we've been doing this shtick for quite a while. in Buddhism and meditation and even teaching. So partly it was just like, for me, I've long wanted to do it formally in a formal context with a great teacher and good community, and just formalize it. I mean, there's something powerful to the ritual, and to ritual itself, which is also a kind of interesting thing tied to meaning that we can get into, of like the importance of ritual and where that's gone in today's kind of postmodern era. But so I was actually thinking earlier about like the evolution of that. So like I already felt like I was committing myself to the Bodhisattva vow. So this was like going through a formal ritual to concretize it, to juice it up, and I was thinking about how vows have felt to me over time, and thinking about a couple of models we use at Buddhist Geeks, phases of insight and waves of wakefulness, and then also thinking about some integral framework like egocentric, sociocentric, world-centric, and so on. But there's like phases of my path where it was like very characterized by seeking and efforting. And that kind of vow was like, let's fucking do it. Like, keep going. That was just like, I gotta get there. And it's really powerful. That kind of vow has got juice to it, but it's kind of more narrow, in the feel to it. I thought also, about hitting dark night territory. And that was like a vow, like, I'll do anything you want. Just make it stop. Just make it stop. Literally, I remember that. I remember even being able to witness it a little bit but also I'm like, yep, this is my reality. Like I'll do anything,
I think they call that the bargaining stage.
Yeah, I went through all of those. I went through all of them hard. And that reflected, in the vow at that time, and it was interesting this time around. This is just my short thing. There's a lot of things I could say about all this, but I just keep it short. Part of it, like, it was really interesting. I'm still reflecting on it, but part of it just felt like reporting for duty. This is what it's like I don't know how to characterize that as. I don't know, just like that's how it felt. Like, here I am. Let's do this thing. Let's go. Versus like, had I done it 10 years ago or 15 years ago in a formal way, it would have been like there would have been like a special, like an extra specialness that I would have put onto it, like on my own side. And so that was really interesting, actually. Like, even now, sitting with it, like, I'm just feeling into it. Like, what's there for me? Like, is there some of that's probably maturity, but is it some of it like my own funk or something? Like, what's going on there that it feels that different compared to had I taken it some other time? So I would say is like, I think the context of our life and the phases impact how a vow feels. That's what it seems like to me. So that's all I'll say for my short.
Beautiful. Vince, I'd like to hear it from your end.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Ryan just said, and maybe highlight a few things that come to mind here, which is one, I took the vow because I'm have a tendency toward narcissism and self-absorption, and so having kids has been tremendously useful in that respect, and this vow too, teaching, being there for others, basically any way I can sort of decenter myself from my life seems to work out well historically. So just continuing along with that. Also, I decided to take it now, although I've been practicing formally in the Buddhist tradition since 2002, almost 20 years. I was very anti-ritual the first decade or so of my practice. I was very rational in terms of how I oriented toward things, and kind of poo-pooing a lot of the mystical, not the phenomenology of mysticism, but the ritual of it. Mm-hmm. And so I think I've just kind of come through that and let that, die down a bit, and appreciate, as Ryan said, the power of ritual to communicate at levels of mind that are in some ways deeper than the rational mind, more mythical. Mm-hmm. So there was that too, just kind of not feeling that resistance. And I also felt a connection with the community that we did it with, which was Dharma Ocean. Reggie Ray is the founding teacher there. I had seen Reggie at Naropa University when I was a student there with Ryan, and felt a real connection to Chogyam Trungpa, his teacher, the Tibetan teacher who founded Naropa. And so it felt like a nice timing of like, hey, we're doing this Bodhisattva vow. The timing feels right. I'm self-absorbed and narcissistic, so I can always use the reminder that it's good to not just be focused on my wants and needs. And so it felt really, it felt like a really good time. And then here's the other thing to kind of tie in another integral friend, Stuart Davis. I had been doing some past life regression work with him. And I won't get into the details of like, this was my past life, etc. But needless to say, having experiences with that, with Stuart, it felt like, oh yeah, this is a vow I somehow have already taken, or I took eons ago at some level, like at a subtle level. And it just feels like my home, like Ryan said, reporting for duty. Like, oh yeah, this again, like time to reaffirm this commitment on some level. It felt a little like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So sort of like something was sort of already there, already formed somewhere in the center of you, and this was kind of maybe implicit explicit.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I like that. Well, and I got to say, it's a tremendously benevolent move for both of you to vow to delay your own, full enlightenment until schlubs like me can make it through the gateless gate. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I never.
Other schlubs in our audience appreciate
it. Meaning, like, we're never gonna get there.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's I think the point, right? And we're okay with that. Yeah. No, and Vince, I'm leaning into what you're talking about sort of, you're joking about this sort of this narcissism that you're, encountering. And it's funny because
part joking.
Ken, well, sort of half joking, right? Ken and I just did a discussion about basically embodying conscious love in all sort of paths of our lives, and waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, showing up, etc. And one of the things that we talked about in the cleaning up section was actually exactly that, was enlightenment as a sort of divine narcissism, which is actually how Ken described the awakening process all the way back in the spectrum of consciousness. He's basically saying, enlightenment allows you to kind of basically trade in this very small, narrow narcissism for a much more fulfilling and wider and better narcissism, which is, I think is kind of a funny frame. But what I really like about the Bodhisattva Vow is it does, I think, exactly what you're kind of pointing to, which is it takes all of this sort of self-gazing, this self-awareness, all these awakening practices that, we're really doing more or less on our own. I mean, we're plugged into a community, but this is our practice. This is our awakening. This is, you know what I mean? We're doing our work in order to, get from here to here, however you want to conceive that. Bringing in the Bodhisattva Vow to me feels like you're bursting that bubble, and you're allowing all of this to spill out of you into the rest of the world. It's bringing basically a really strong second person component to that awakening process. And there's a piece of that actually feels almost inevitable, like no matter what lineage you're plugged into, there's some version of this waiting there for you. There's some version of a Bodhisattva Vow that sits really at the core of all these traditions, because if you're just doing it for your own sort of psycho-spiritual masturbation, I mean, ultimately, what's the point? How much goodness are you really helping to sort of facilitate and to bring into the world? So I'm really kind of keyed in on that point, on how it takes these wisdoms that are, hard won in a lot of ways. I mean, you've got to, sit, you got to get your 10,000 hours on your own in order for those wisdoms to really emerge. But once they do emerge, you're almost liberating them by delivering them, not to just like the people in your direct vicinity, but like to manifestation itself. I mean, again, you're vowing to like not pass through the gate until everyone else does. And talk about selfless service, right? I mean, it feels like that this is just something that sits at the very, very core of you and actually helps focus and refine all of your engagements with other people and other groups in the world. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's beautiful. And I think it shows this sort of this bursting of the dam of spiritual maturity. You jive with that?
I jive with it in terms of the ideals behind it. The actual living reality is obviously doesn't always live up to that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. How has this? I mean, how has this actually landed in terms of your lived reality? Does something feel different after taking the vow?
No, not for me. I still feel like a schlub.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about, whatever tradition, there's going to be like flowery things around it, like when you do this, like amazing things happen, right? Like and that, to be fair, like in the ritual part, like there's power in it, I think, like Vince was saying, and so we can say that something is happening by doing that. But as far as like the subjective thing, no, it wasn't felt like, just turned into an Avenger or something like that. I think actually what mostly happens for me, like it's especially since then, is just sitting with questions like, what does this mean right now? Like what's being asked of me right now? And I don't know. Like part of that is like, I don't know. Like and my response wouldn't have been always, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I know what's needed right now. And then I'm trying to do that. But now it's just sort of like looking around. Okay. Kind of that's why I like reporting for duty. It's like, what do I need to do? What am I not seeing? Et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that's more of what triggered it for me, is more of that thing of like, I don't know.
It reminds me of something that, we quote Vince often with this, but it kind of takes you to a place of what is mine, right? Just as I'm doing my practice, what is mine? What is me? What is not me? What is actually mine here? And it actually brings you to what is mine to do, which again feels like a fruition of that path.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I would say, like, in terms of like the maturing aspect, and so like, built into the Bodhisattva Vow, if we're really looking at it, it does have this feeling of like forever. So it's like, might as well like chill on any like ideals that we're gonna like start pumping up our ego with, just like, okay, slow and steady is probably the pace for a lot of life. Stewart's song, that's a lot of lifetimes.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things I do just check in on like a lot, and I mentioned this like in teaching and trainings, to kind of temper things. Like we, the Bodhisattva Vow, like part of the vow we have here. I don't know if I should read the whole little thing there to share that, or just I kind of made the assumption that everybody listening probably know what the Bodhisattva Vow is, but I'm like, oh, maybe not. But like the first line is, from now until attaining enlightenment, I vow to work for the welfare of all. And like letting that sink in, and like at first it could be like, yeah, let's fucking avenge, like I said, we're gonna do it. But like really, it's just kind of like watching the news. And I always use my favorite person to think about, Donald Trump, and this kind of thing. And like when I think about him and see his mug on the TV, do I feel that? Do I feel I want to work for the welfare of Donald Trump? There's some part of me that just goes, ugh, okay, I guess, like, yeah, but if I don't, then okay, that's something to feel into. So I don't know, just like that tempers the ideas of like, really, does it include everybody? Like, or do I go, no, I like it for me and for the other people who also practice with me and kind of have the same ideals, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah.
Well, it's your mind, folks. It's one thing to like devote your life to something or to a cause. You guys went above and beyond, the overachievers that you are, and decided, I'm going to devote the infinite regress of lifetimes. And that's a deep commitment.
Yeah. One other thing real quick, and this I'm quoting you, Vince, that I remember too, is like, along with like what I just said too, we can have some real immature spiritual ideals, like where we lose track of integral things like development and what's happening in all the four quadrants of our society. And Vince, I remember you tweeted like when Trump got COVID, and then there was like some people who might have said genuinely and maybe in spiritual ideal way, like, may he be better, may he be free of suffering. And Vince, I don't know if you kept the tweet, but you said, if that's for the benefit of all, then yeah, let it be. And so implicitly there's a but there.
Yeah.
But if not, then no. So that just points to things of like, they're the ideas that we have about like how our things should be and how our response should be around Bodhisattva Vow and stuff like that can go deep, Vince, I don't know.
Yeah, Vince, respond to that if you like. Just briefly, I just want to mention, I think that actually brings us into a really great discussion of what's different about this vow at, again, let's just say the amber level, the green level, and the turquoise level. Yeah. And it really seems to have, obviously these different altitudes, these different stages of our own ongoing development, they put us in very, very different relationship with each other, right? With
reality.
We think of each other differently based on sort of what stage we're coming at. And I'm sure that directly informs not just how you sort of hold the vow, but how you enact it, how you actually execute it in real time with real people who are sitting in front of you at any given moment.
Right. Yeah. No, that feels true to me. Like I don't think, I think early Buddhism actually nailed this. They when they talked about right view or wise view in the Eightfold Path, which basically more or less states that you can't separate the view from the awakening. You can't have some experience independent of the frameworks and the meaning making structures you're seeing through. So I think, yeah, enlightenment itself changes as one matures, and so too does, yeah, one's understanding of like what am I doing with this, and how do I integrate these meditative attainments and experiences and whatever else into, and the long retreat practice in the case of Ryan and I, into like just day-to-day living. And I think for the longest time I was probably hanging out in the sort of the rational individualist, kind of orange stage of development while I was engaging with these things. And so for me, it was all about the maps and the models, and I didn't give a shit about the Bodhisattva vow exactly at the time. But I think I did care about the welfare of others, but I conceived of it mostly as material welfare. It's like, and the gross realm is all there is, more or less was my view. So for me, that's changed a lot as as time's passed and have had experiences. And now I question those set of assumptions about the nature of reality, that it is just this material plane that we see, and that welfare only happens at this level, what the Tibetan Buddhists would call the nirmanakaya, the body that you're experiencing this waking gross world with. So now I've sort of have let my metaphysics have loosened, and
which is usually a sign that you're onto something.
Yeah,
right?
I hope so. And it's like, so you said earlier, it's like we've made this commitment, and it's a big commitment to make. Like, to me, it's like, yeah, on the gross level, we have made this commitment, and we went to a ceremony and we did this ritual. On a subtle level, it feels to me like, again, this is some part of my as Stuart would put it, my long self. This is part of who I am at a deeper level that I can't understand completely based on the causes and conditions of this lifetime. Now, I don't like have a detailed idea of how this works, but I do it feels true. So in that sense, it feels like, oh, I'm just aligning this body and mind with the deeper part of me, and I'm riding those waves, those currents, and trusting that like this is where things are going. So I'm going to get on the ride and strap in.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. One of the things I was talking to Ken about a couple of weeks ago in terms of the Bodhisattva vow is actually sort of looking at both sides of it, sort of the Bodhisattva side and the vow side, which I think is there's some interesting things to say about that. So, on the Bodhisattva side, one of the things we're talking about is, it's by a miracle of awakening, we're able to escape our sort of narrow narcissism and find a much deeper identity, a divine narcissism that we call being a bodhisattva. I mean, being a bodhisattva is a particular type of identity that we can take on for ourselves that has, certain qualities that are associated with it, can, maybe help us regulate our own behaviors and how we sort of move through the world just by sort of holding on to that identity piece. And it's a more subtle, liberated identity, but it's almost a bar that we create for ourselves that we expect ourselves to live up to. And that's where the other side of the equation comes in, the vow piece. And I think that even the word vow, I think, is something that has been somewhat, I don't know, devalued in our culture. I told Ken my theory is it's because particularly with Gen X, we grew up with like crazy divorce rates and things like marriage vows are just getting thrown out the window, like they never meant anything at all, right? So the vow just sort of has taken on this feeling of like it's just a fancy promise, and you can kind of cross your fingers behind your back if you want to, and it's like, well, no, that's not what a vow is supposed to be. There's like a strong almost fairly rigid kind of amber enactment of the word vow that I think is actually really, really important, because when you take a vow like this, you're not just making some surface level promise. I mean, you are basically saying, at the very, very core of my being, I found a pivot point. right? And I'm going to bend everything from this point on around that fulcrum, that sort of innermost fulcrum where all of my efforts, all of my, work in the world is hopefully, driving in sort of the same direction. And that's, towards the direction of liberation and love and awakening and so forth. But really, I think coming to terms with how strong that vow is and how deep you're really supposed to let it kind of run through you, I think can be challenging for people because we don't have a lot of, comparisons. We don't have a lot of role models when it comes to that sort of, I mean, again, it's one thing to wrap a single life around a given cause, but to wrap multiple lifetimes around it, Jesus, that takes a whole other level of commitment and of realization.
Yeah, I think a lot about what Vince has been saying about, rationalism and gross realm and like how much these influence like how we think of a vow. I was reading through Wikipedia, seeing just what people say about vows and things like that. And a lot of what's written about vows is very religious, like mythological kind of level of religion. And so that makes sense that after a while, people got really turned off by that. If kind of evolve beyond that kind of orientation, it's like, why would I do that? That makes no sense. And then talking about a rational orientation, it was interesting in Wikipedia, they were differentiating between vow and oath. An oath is something that just somebody witnesses, but a vow is something done with, there's a direct relational connection with somebody else. Often it was a deity. So an oath will be something more of like what a vow feels like, like I commit to doing something. Oh, I witness you saying that. Okay. Like a contractual sort of, gross realm kind of thing. And then like, how does that keep evolving? But I also think something has to do with like meta rationality and what we think about, if we take reality to be mostly gross realm experience and rationality wants to limit it to that kind of thing a lot of times, then it seems like a vow would be limited. But these are questions I'm sitting with,
Yeah, and I love that. And I love seeing sort of the, again, the simultaneity of first, second, and third person when it comes to taking a vow. Because again, you're adopting this first person identity of a bodhisattva, which is itself sort of, that identity itself comes from a particular third person metaphysics that you can believe in, or you don't even have to believe in order for this identity to emerge. But there's this idea of multiple lifetimes and of awakening process and all of that, all of which can be sort of seen in third person. But then, yeah, there's that second person, it feels like, it feels like a fulcrum. I mean, it feels like sort of, both the first person and third person find balance on that second person pivot point. Which again is sort of, it's, when you're making the vow, I mean, who are you vowing to? I mean, a vow sort of requires a second person, whether that second person is, some concept of a god or an authority who represents that god, or it's a vow to your own deepest, truest self, however you visualize that. There's always this second person component to it that really, I think, having that second person creates a sense of accountability, right? That just sort of a finger crossed promise doesn't really bring with it. A vow has accountability to it.
Yeah.
Which means if you don't get me into that gate, y'all are screwed.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. How do we get you there, Corey? What is it going to take?
Kicking and screaming seems to be the only way anyone's figured out so far.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vince.
I was thinking about your earlier question, Corey, too, about how these different altitudes impact the way that one understands the Bodhisattva vow. And I was thinking too about the stage conception in Buddhism that Ken writes about in at length in the Fourth Turning. But this idea of these different turnings of the wheel of Dharma, that there are these different iterations or evolutionary epochs that Buddhism has gone through. And the Bodhisattva is an ideal that is most associated with the second turning, the second iteration, starting in the 2nd century CE. And before that, the ideal was the Arhat. The Arhat is the perfectly enlightened one, the one who's gone beyond suffering. And like you said, who's discovered this formless being that transcends name and form. And they are kind of abiding in that formless release. just chilling in emptiness, essentially.
and divinely narcissistic.
Yeah, totally. It's like, I got mine. So
everything is literally me. So go wrong.
Yeah, everything is literally me or not me. Either way, we're good. And to me, the what's amazing about the second turning teachings was this emphasis on compassion being equally important to wisdom, so that you have these two. Wisdom isn't the most important value that transcends all other values. Like, it's in service also of how you are in the world and how you are with other beings. And this idea of emptiness, not as like a lack of self-referentiality or a lack of a center point, but rather emptiness as interdependence. Myself doesn't arise independently of you all. That's what emptiness means in the second turning. It doesn't mean like there's no substance here. No, there is. It's just not, it just can't be by itself. And so I love that reconceptualization, because it is non-duality. It is that kind of recognition that like you can't escape this experience because there's nothing but this, and it's empty. The good thing. But to me, that bodhisattva is the first move. It's the first non-dualistic ideal in that tradition of like, what does it look like if you've really integrated emptiness and form in your experience? Like, this is a description of what that looks like, an ideal really of what that looks like.
And then would you say the third turning sort of completes that circuit by simply noticing the
I was gonna let Ryan talk about the third turning, since that's been more of his spiritual home.
Anyone but me should talk about these next turnings. So Ryan, take it away. Buddy.
Well, no, actually, I was kind of contemplating like this a little bit, like in that kind of progression, and how Kin might have talked about it, but I don't remember that passage there. I remember thinking like it was interesting, like in Sokjin, like what refuge looked like, which is tied, I think, into this kind of like progression. And like, of course, the initial refuge, like take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and like that's the gold standard from the get-go. But later you would take refuge in the deities and dakinis. Like that would be like who you'd say you want to take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in deities and dakinis, like this kaleidoscope of reality, because there's like how many deities and dakinis. Yeah, I mean, of course, then you have the thing of like Sokjin and Mahamudra going to like, just saying, just kidding on everything. They have all the progression, and then they just counter everything that's come before it, and just like basic. When I taught the awareness meditation training, the words that are used so often in those texts are like, now that you've exhausted this, like every which way you're trying to look to establish something, a view, a concept, etc. Now that you've exhausted it, just now what? Is just trying to point to that, like, of the exhausting out of the conceptual mind and of positioning one with any particular form or not form. And it can be kind of maddening because we're always trying to find a place to sit, so yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of sitting with that one. Vince, do you have a?
I mean, for me, what's been recently inspiring about the whole third turning teachings has been, one, it's the tantric emphasis. Yeah. If like, you don't just have to renounce everything to realize this, you also could embrace form and the fullness of experience and sensual pleasure, and, and even drugs and alcohol could become a vehicle with the right intention for liberation. That just kind of concords with my experience a little more of how this path has been. And it's messy too. But there's this idea that if you harness reality fully, like you don't think of anything as being outside of the realm of skillful means, of like things that can awaken, then it's possible to become a Buddha in this very life, like to become a really deeply, a fully awakened being who has mastered skillful means, who's this freely functioning, awakened superstar, I guess. And I think I not that I think that's going to happen in this lifetime, but I find that somehow now inspiring, but even more inspiring, I think of the fourth turning, and the only word I can think of is like, it's like a meta sattva, someone who has this cognitive capacity to hold perspectives and move between different worldviews, and who is kind of like choosing, to enter into, like the spiral wizard, entering into these different ways of seeing things and working for the welfare of all, at all quadrants, levels, lines, states, like using that like much broader, bigger meta view to help orient that the activity of being a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's pretty powerful. That's amazing, actually. That's the most interesting thing.
It gives you a bigger toolkit, really, in order to sort of operate and intervene in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's like the skillful means can get more skillful in a certain way. Like there's more to that, more resolution, from which to pull.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. And again, I think it really does highlight the differences between sort of amber, green, and turquoise expressions of this. I can see how a lot of, for example, green expressions of the Bodhisattva vow are going to be, a little bit wishy-washy, a little, Vince, you would have been canceled for your Donald Trump comment, and you know what I mean? Because everything sort of is supposed to weigh the same, and everything is supposed to be treated the same, and everything kind of, let's just find equanimity here, guys. And it's like, well, you know what? We live in a raucous, chaotic fucking world, and some things are honestly more deserving of our compassion, let's just say, than others, which doesn't say that our compassion doesn't extend out to meet all things. I think it certainly does, but you get this sort of, it's like discernment comes back, right? You kind of get this sense of discernment. You can tell deeper from more shallow. You can tell wider from more narrow. You can tell higher from lower. And that begins to sort of inform how you move through the world and how you choose to express your compassion at any given moment. Because guess what? You're only still one person chipping away at one little corner of the cosmos, trying to, make whatever difference you can as a bodhisattva. And you need the very best tools possible in order to do that.
Yeah, one of the ways I see the green meme, or the pluralistic form of bodhisattva, it in Buddhist communities, is like it's the emphasis on social justice and on addressing these sort of human systems, especially that have gone kind of invisible for a long time. And sort of like, oh wait, there's these systems and we're embedded in them, and they're causing a lot of the suffering. Like, yeah, suffering is inherent in experience. Being sentient means you suffer, and like there's all this extra suffering that is sort of being created at the systems level. And I think the emphasis there is it's like a one-pointed focus on addressing the systemic level.
Right.
But then to me, that it becomes myopic, both in that it's only focused on the human, and also that it's only focused on primarily on systems. And so it's like meditation in a way becomes a dirty word to a pluralistic bodhisattva, I think, because it's like, oh, you're just navel gazing, just this sort of solipsistic practice, which I think is often true, like, to be fair to them. But that's not all it can be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other, I was thinking when you're describing sort of the third and into the fourth turnings, one of the thoughts that came up to me is sort of this reconciliation of, let's just call them sort of ascending and descending currents. Ascending current says, go sit at a wall for 12 hours a day, every day for the next 40 years and tell me what happens. And the descending current, it's a little bit more of that tantric, go fucking have fun. And you know what I mean? And recognize the fullness of existence alongside the emptiness of existence, and how that makes it much more, easy to select for in contemporary society, because we don't live in a world like we did 1,000 years ago, where, going and sitting in a cave for 20 years staring at a wall was actually a reasonable option that someone could do with their lives. That's simply not possible. And so
if you were a dude.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. If you're a dude, so it feels like this is, these new turnings, which obviously makes sense. I mean, the turnings are themselves a response to the ongoing evolutionary emergence within the world of form. We're able to sort of get it increasingly better as we continue to move forward. And I think the fourth turning, if there is one, if that wheel is starting to kind of crack a little bit, I hope it is doing the exact same thing. It's giving people a way to better respond to the challenges and the conditions within the world of form. And Vince, I love what you're talking about with sort of that green eye towards social justice, because I agree with that. I think one of the things they're really good at is sort of waving their hands and saying there's a problem here. I think where they get limited is oftentimes they have sort of a lower resolution understanding of what systems are, how they actually work, the type of systemic oppressions that exist, the ones that are, you know, still being sort of intentionally enforced versus the ones that are more, you know, an integral language, let's just say sort of auto-poetically self-reinforcing karmas from previous systems that no longer exist, right? That's one of the biggest challenges I think that the social justice movement is facing right now, is they don't know how to make that distinction. And they assume that any of these inertias from previous ways of being that continue to visit us today are therefore the result of some policy that's still in effect today. And I think that, you know, a more integral sort of understanding helps us kind of tease these apart. Well, in zone 8, most of those, there's still a few, we're ironing out some wrinkles, but you know, most of the explicitly discriminatory laws in zone 8 have been sort of, you know, they've evolved, they've been changed, they've been taken off the books, or, you know, it's hard to find a law these days that says treat these people differently than those people. That's kind of gone by history's wayside. And yet the karmas and the consequences and the inertias from the previous eras and the laws that were encoded then are still with us today. And how to intervene there, right? How to actually use our awakening and our awareness and our attention to reduce suffering in those zones is tremendously difficult and complicated. And I think a little bit over the heads of a green bodhisattva in terms of their capacity to actually see the problem and address it. I'm hoping, if anything, this is what a fourth turning can help sort of bring to the surface, is like we have more granularity when it comes to the ways that we can talk about these various problems. And yes, there are versions of oppression and discrimination and, you know, sometimes even hatred that exist in every single one of these different perspectival zones. And we have to be super skillful in how we actually call that out, how we name it, and how we go about trying to address these problems in order to liberate that suffering. Which, you know, is the type of thing, when you're a green social justice warrior, I mean, you know, what's the expression? All you have is a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. I think we see this problem, you know, often. The good news there is, guys, they're creating exactly the life conditions that integral needs, right, in order to sort of push itself off of, so that it can find its voice in the world. So I see all the dysfunctions that we're seeing as really ultimately good news, because it's going to call into emergence something that's more adequate than what we currently have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, for me, that's a big aspiration with Buddhist Geeks. And it's like, how do we transcend and include the values of these previous altitudes, including the pluralistic values? How do we actually have a healthy pluralistic values operating in our community? And, you know, how do we train teachers and facilitators to be aware, trauma informed, and, you know, things that are important at that band of consciousness. And I think they rightfully so. But then how do we transcend the limitations that sometimes come also with the enactment of those pluralistic values, and the ways that we overstep, the ways that we trying to right wrongs, we create new wrongs, and
that's right,
all of that. Yeah, and I think, to me, it's like, if I found a community that was like that, I would have been drawn to that. I'd have been like, oh wow, this is cool. Like, I need this. Like, I want to look at race, and I want to look at my conditioning as a male and all these different identities that pluralistic values kind of harp on. I want to see that and decondition some of that that's not, you know, worth carrying on and that I can let go of. But at the same time, like, I don't want to spend my whole life just thinking about all these different aspects of identity, when, like, waking up is about finding that which transcends and includes all of these different identities, and which is emerging. As you said, there's something, identity isn't, there's something in which our identities are maturing. They're not fixed.
Yeah. And I loved your use of the word pluralism, because, you know, Ryan and I, a few episodes back, several months ago, did, I think we called it Inhabit Your Wokeness. And we actually tried to sort of reframe wokeism. Well, we tried to reframe really postmodernism as not only being postmodern, but it's also pre-integral. And as such, there's a lot of ideas and qualities that emerged at the postmodern stage that we continue to carry with us at integral altitudes. Pluralism being, I think, a great example. Pluralism is tremendously important. We become aware of the importance of pluralism really beginning at the green altitude. And then at integral altitudes, that matures as, well, integral methodological pluralism, for example. So there's a pluralism, but there's also a structure. There's a discernment. There's a discernment of depth and of location and proximity and appropriateness and so forth. And this is just an example of one of these ideas that emerged at a particular altitude and then truly blossoms at higher altitudes. And, it's one of my biggest problems with a lot of the social justice movement these days is they're not oftentimes very pluralistic at all. I mean, when you actually talk to them about like, how many different conflicting opposing views are you capable of sort of holding at once? And, oftentimes the answer is very disappointing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. We just had Gabriel Wilson come to our teacher. I know he's been on your show, on the Integral Justice show, and he brought our whole teacher training cohort, the folks that we're training now through the evolving worldviews practice and voice dialogue, and it's just so helpful to enact those developmental models as like practices and see, oh, this is what it's like to be cosmocentric mind or ethnocentric mind. And it was so obvious to me, and every time I do that practice, how little attention we're paying to where we become ethnocentric, and kind of how that kicks up in our political tribes. And I know you all have talked about this probably to death, but
it's fascinating to see the parallel conversations occurring in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just owning our ethnocentrism is such a good thing to do right now. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm also ethnocentric. Like I feel identified with you all, and I don't want to rock the boat sometimes because I don't want to be kicked off, and and I value loyalty and consistency and coherency, and I don't know, all these things are important to me. And I oftentimes will just not even look at something if it doesn't fit into my space. I'll just ignore it, just okay, whatever. I'm not going to look into that because I don't want to fuck with my current understanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's so helpful to do, because right now, like as you're saying, pluralistic communities that have pluralistic values aren't often acting pluralistic. To me, it's like we're often acting more ethnocentric, and trying to figure out how to bring out these values that are so much bigger than our ethnocentric allegiances.
Yeah, it sometimes feels to me like sort of these green ideas and qualities of tolerance inevitably ran against the wall of the paradox of tolerance, which is that if you want a tolerant society, you can't tolerate intolerance.
Right.
And I think that green just doesn't know what to do with that. You know what I mean? So it sort of caused a very sudden regression, I think, towards, well, less tolerant forms of enacting each other. And I think that we've in many ways remained stuck in that place. Particularly because all of this is taking place on like this flat deconstructive social media ecosystem, where all of these perspectives and views and values, they don't enfold with each other in any meaningful way. They just slide. It's like looking at my Reddit feed and I go from like dystopian nightmare to, a cute puppy to like something happening in politics and it all just slides, and you feel your brain getting scrambled and trying to move in 1,000 directions at once. And it's like, Jesus, this is the malaise that we all find ourselves in. And so in a certain sense, this reaction, this regressive kind of pushing against of sort of these classic ideas of pluralism, it makes a certain kind of sense to me. Even though it's painful to watch, because you're watching a lot of people get, really sort of devoured by this. And then people really, I think, begin to conduct themselves in a particular way based on the aspects of their identity that they're really choosing to front load at any given moment. In other words, we've all become walking, talking Facebook profiles. right? Which is why we put so much emphasis on like, here's my pronouns, here's what I expect you to call me here, you know what I mean? Here's sort of all my labels. It's like we're making objects out of many of our own sort of interior subjects, but we're keeping them as objects. We're not pulling these pieces of our identity back in. We're just sort of fetishizing them, I think, in a certain sense for everyone else. All of which I think informs what a bodhisattva does on a daily basis in order to deliver more compassion more skillfully into the world. I mean, you have to have a sense of like the architecture of the world that we find ourselves in so that we know where to put our efforts, right? And how much skill and how much deliberation to bring to any given project that we find ourselves involved in. We have to know sort of the shape of the cultures that we find ourselves in. And I think integral, helps us make a little bit better sense than, some of the narrow perspectives that a lot of us grew up with.
Yeah, this feels really relevant to me because I feel like when we started Buddhist Geeks and I was working with you at Integral Institute, like the broader culture, like the mass of culture was rational still. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it seemed that way. And it seems like we've been moving into like the pluralistic wave in a more serious way in the last several years. And in the Buddhist world in America and globally, there's been a whole reckoning that's happened with that and a transformation. And so like I'd say, with Ryan and I, when we teach, like we're mostly working with people who are rational, pluralistic, and probably integral. And a lot of folks are very much dealing with these topics and issues. And, a lot of us, especially us white men, are tiptoeing around them and trying not to hurt people's feelings. And, like we're dealing with it, how we deal with it. And it's messy, like it's super messy. And it's like, sometimes I wish I could go back to the days of being in the meditation hall where no one talks about politics and we're all just meditating and silent. Yeah. And even though I realize like we can't go back there, and that's not how I see Dharma evolving anyway. But there was a simplicity to that of just like kind of not having to open the box of all those different perspectives and have to contend with them. Yeah. And now it's like, oh, we have to contend with them. We have to address them. We have to know the terminology and know the theory and be able to kind of intelligently work with people around these things. And I'd say it's a real challenge. It's a lot harder than just teaching people how to meditate well or how to run a retreat center or, the things that my teachers were mostly focused on.
Yeah. And I certainly agree that the only way out of this is through. Can't go back. I think the only, I don't know if I would agree that people on average were more rational back then, but the average mode of discourse in our culture certainly was more, I think, modern.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's sort of the irony of this is that, all of our media, we shifted from this sort of centralized orange media model, which had referees and had, the news stories were coming through a perspective, which would, bring some kind of discernment, would say, this is, more worth your attention than that is. And there were flaws with that system too, as well. I mean, clearly, having centralized anything, I think can be dangerous, but now we've almost overcompensated in the exact opposite direction. So we've created these very, very flat postmodern platforms where there are no curators, there is no there's no mechanisms of enfoldment anywhere to be found. And so we are left to ourselves to curate our own informational terrain. And guess what, guys? We're not equipped to do that. We're just not equipped to do that. And so I often use the metaphor. Have you ever seen it's called a spiral of death. It's something that happens to ant colonies when a group of ants gets disconnected from the rest of the colony. What they basically start doing is, the way ants communicate is through pheromones. They follow each other's trails of pheromones. So when a sort of a subculture of the ant colony gets broken off from the rest of the colony, what they do is they literally just follow each other around in a circle over and over again, going nowhere until they just die, basically, right? They just grind themselves out, they exhaust themselves, and they die.
So that's like the biological equivalent of the wheel of death on the computer.
Yeah, I think it's a biological equivalent of like QAnon, right? I mean, I think that this is this is exactly what our postmodern platforms do, is they put us into this mode where we're simply following each other, right? And we've so deconstructed, authority, we've deconstructed expertise, we've deconstructed so much of the sort of structures that kept our culture, well, understandable, approachable in the first place, that actually created more shared meaning for more people. We've dissected that into a billion different pieces, a billion different subcultures, all of whom are basically just following themselves around the circle. I mean, we saw this with like Plandemic, we saw this with like QAnon, we see this seems to be an ongoing problem that's not just a problem of like human beings and how we conduct ourselves in a vacuum, but it's like, these are the problems that social media itself are bringing to us. There's a new set of challenges that I think we're only just now beginning to become like really, really aware of, and how dangerous it actually is, because nobody knows how to regulate it, right? It's either, we were just talking about this in Integral Life Forum today, it's either like total dystopian misinformation and propaganda on one side, or total dystopian top-down authoritative censorship on the other, and nobody knows how to navigate that. All of which is to say, what we actually need today more than anything is a new set of super skillful and really super bright bodhisattvas to help forge a new path through this wilderness that we now find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning the technology piece, because I mean, obviously, as Buddhist geeks, that's something we've been thinking a lot about. And I rant about this sometimes on Twitter, which is sort of pointless, but I sort of, I get irritated when with the flatness of the platform, and with the fact that it's like, okay, I've been doing some things for I've been doing this stuff for 20 years. And I would say at this point, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm a very sincere, deep practitioner and teacher. And so when I have an encounter with someone on Twitter, who thinks they've got the whole thing figured out, and they're just, it's like, they're anonymous. They have no credentials. I don't know who they trained with, who they study with. I can't see their face. I don't know whether, I don't know literally who this person is, but everyone's like treating their comments equivalently to mine. And I'm like, this is actually doing me a disservice to be on this platform right now. And I can see how much confusion happens when people start following someone else around because they say a couple insightful things, but like, who is this person? Like, why should I listen to them? Why should I boost that signal? Yeah, I think you're right that this is like a really technological problem as well that we're running into with our social media platforms.
Yeah.
So bodhisattvas, please recreate.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it, right? Because we really do need minds and hearts, minds that are capable of navigating this amount of complexity, and hopefully from an integrally informed vantage point, but also an awakened heart that is able to, again, that sort of bends itself, that commits itself to not being the smartest person in the room, which is, I think, something we often see in integral circles, just people vying to be the smartest person in the room. No, that doesn't matter. Be the most effective person in the room. Be the, you know what I mean? Be the kindest, be the person to actually bring the most goodness, however you know how to, with your own unique thumbprint, right? I think every person has a different, sort of piece of this puzzle to bring. And it's unique to every individual, but fucking bring it. Because this world needs you now more than it's ever needed you before. And it needs both your heart, your enlightened heart, your awakened heart, and it needs this like really, really rich cognitive mind just to be able to see new possibilities in the first place. Recognize the challenges, see new possibilities, bring your awakened heart to the problem. And I think if we were able to do that, especially if we can do that as a community, new possibilities will emerge, new solutions will emerge, and this thing will continue to tick forward.
Nice. I love it.
I guess, we're sort of at an hour, so we might be starting to wind down soon, but I guess one question for you guys, I'd love to hear your console, because, there's a lot of people who are going to be listening to this, who are listening right now on, places like YouTube, and will watch afterwards on Integral Life, who aren't necessarily in, the Buddhist tradition, or even any strong tradition or lineage to begin with. They don't necessarily have, a version of the Bodhisattva vow that they would take for themselves. But how do you think, what is your counsel in terms of ordinary folks who are sort of outside of a tradition to do something similar, to find this like deep level of commitment that encourages them to, again, not just sort of quarantine themselves from the world through a rigorous practice of meditation and navel gazing, but really, devoting ourselves to selfless service and to the reduction of suffering in the world. What's your advice? Like, what is sort of a micro version of the Bodhisattva vow that anyone can take on, no matter sort of what idiom they're coming from or where they find themselves in life?
Well, one thing that came up for me, I mean, just in hearing you all chat last few minutes, I realized, like, pretty much this is a question I use a lot with myself and with students, but that feels relevant, is just what is needed. And like with that though, like in my life, is basically like, if I keep doing something that results in the same suffering, and especially if I think it's supposed to help, but yet it doesn't, at some point, that like deep gut level recognition of like, I got to do something different. And it usually doesn't feel good in a certain sense of like, but I thought this was going to work, or I thought this should work. Like being able to admit that, like, this is just me, like my passionate response right now is like being able to just admit that and just say like, I recognize, I surrender to this truth here that like what I'm doing is not working, and I don't know what's next or what should happen, but I'm going to just sit with that question, what is needed? So like, this is like especially relevant to like, like when we talk about green meme and integral, it's like for green, it's like the values are so important, the efficacy is questionable to me. That's always it. Values are great, strategy is questionable. So just say like, if your strategy is not working over and over, then just admit out loud that it's not working, but yet something can happen. I just got to look at this differently. And usually a lot of times for this, it either looks to cleaning up or looks to really growing up. Like growing up to me often just happens in that way, that we just finally die to the fact that how we're looking at the world and engaging with it isn't big enough. And we just finally say, okay, fine, I'm going to figure out how to live into something bigger. And so to me, like, that's, I don't know, it's pretty central for me. And like in the vow, like of like, what does it look like practically speaking? I'm just going to keep asking that question. And I asked that myself, like we're talking about, responding in the integral community to like a pluralist context, for example. I go, I don't know exactly what would be the most efficacious way to respond to help solve those problems together. I don't know. I can identify maybe a problem, but like, what's the best way for me to respond in my cosmic address? I don't know, but I'm going to sit with that. I'm not just going to be pissed off, because I recognize me being pissed off is one of those things where I'm like, okay, I do get pissed off, but like it's exhausting and it doesn't lead to results. So I'm like, okay, I give up. So what can I do? So what's needed? Like just force me into like a reorientation, and like, but maybe some of that comes with like, development too, of being able to like see that happens, like, and it's happened multiple times repeatedly in life, and then it'll happen again to where it's like maybe a little easier to just accept that. But I don't know. That's what comes with it for me.
I love that. Vince, I'll let you respond as well, but I just want to, quickly mention, Ryan, it reminds me of the talk we did about the integral ikigai, right? And that as sort of like, here is a way to generate a greater sense of life purpose by actually looking at the things that we can do and the things that are valuable to us in all four quadrants, and then finding a path forward that can really sort of harmonize and integrate those impulses. And there's a reason why when I talked to Ken about this a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Bodhisattva Vow and the integral ikigai at the same time. I mean, we really sort of it was like one beat and then another beat, right? So there's a vow and an identity, a commitment and an identity that you can find within yourself. And then when it comes to actually expressing that in the world, something like the integral ikigai can help guide that process, just in terms of answering that question of all the things to be done, what is mine to do? And I love how those two ideas really do kind of dovetail really, really nicely.
And I would say, like, even to be really radical, maybe this is where, like, a path of awakening can be helpful, to radically let go of assumptions. Like even in the assumptions of like, oh, I got this integral map and how to look at the world, like to even like momentarily let go of that, because maybe my enactment of that even isn't really useful. So like, can I just let go completely enough to let some shit move through, to like let a response emerge, like in that question, like to not, just sometimes it's just needed to sit in that like confusion, and to recognize it.
Totally.
And one other thing that made me think of this, Vince, another tweet, we'll just quote your tweets all day long.
They're very entertaining.
Vince said something, he quoted like the hippie phrase, all we need is love, that was touted a lot. And Vince, you said something like, yeah, and maybe like healthcare and,
Netflix.
Yeah, things like that, like other things that are also needed. Like, and you could see like in the 70s, if you were to like push back against that idea, you'd be like, dude, what are you, an asshole? Like, all you like love sounds pretty good. But after a while, it's like, that's not enough. It's like part of it, but like, it's not in and of itself. It feels good, but it's not enough. Like we have to do more than that. And like, we'll keep seeing that too. It's like, all we need to do is fix the systems. But then we find out that like, yes, and it's not enough actually to realize, to fully enact what's behind that. So like, and that's just feels like it's going to keep going. Like when will that end? Like this idea of like living into something of like, yes, this is a good response. And then realizing shit, we were missing something, it's not embracing enough. So anyways, Vince.
Yeah. So Corey, you were asking if I were going to suggest one thing, like a mini Bodhisattva.
Yeah. A little
to
micro,
the folks listening. Micro Bodhisattva. Yeah. The first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was for the folks who are listening to this, if you don't have a practice, or if you do, either way, find a community that you can practice with, or even multiple communities. Practice with the Integral Life community. Come to the Buddhist Geeks network and practice with us. Find where, wherever your communities are that you're drawn to. And if you have a practice that you're DIYing, my suggestion would be to do practice with other people in community too, because I think just the very context of a relational practice, it highlights the Bodhisattva path, because it's like suddenly I'm with others and explicitly with others in practice. So those kinds of conversations are going to arise, and it's just going to prompt one to be thinking in terms of relationality rather than just like my experience, my phenomenology. I think that just makes a huge difference. And then to kind of go back again to what is a bodhisattva? What is it really? I really like Kosho Uchiyama, who is a modern Japanese teacher. He said, a bodhisattva is one who sees the world through adult eyes and whose actions are the actions of a true adult. So going back to maturity, that is one of the pieces that's still not talked about much at all in the Buddhist world culture, is development, is maturity, is this vertical distinctions of like, however you measure it, we keep growing up after childhood, and some of us are more mature than others in certain respects. And like in that,
thank you. I'll take that compliment. Thank you. You guys will catch up.
So yeah, that's great. I think understanding a bodhisattva as one who's waking up and growing up together is a really good, like Ken's vertical and horizontal enlightenment. Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you. And your advice spoke right to me, because I am very much a DIY homebrew practice kind of guy. So sure. I take that very seriously. I take that counsel very seriously.
Well, and I understand it too. I just want to say that I understand why people DIY, because so many communities ask stuff of us that's not appropriate. They ask us to conform to that model and to like let go of our creative potential. And, to me, it's like you find a community that lets you be you and you can interface with other people.
Yeah.
Kind of both and.
That's beautiful. It's an important point too. And just plug our own platform. If people watching this right now are looking for a community of practitioners, hey, it just so happens we have an entire Integral Life practice community on integrallife.com. We have almost daily practices that you guys can check out. They're in all categories of waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. And also, yes, all the resources that Buddhist Geeks makes available. Highly recommend that as well. I've been really sort of thankful for the cross-pollination that we've had, both because, Vince, you and I literally worked together, Jesus, like lifetimes ago. Talk about a vow that takes you through lifetimes. I mean,
17 years ago, buddy.
Jesus, man. Crazy, right? It's crazy how much history there is there. So yeah, I'm feeling much gratitude for this sort of cross-pollination that, you guys have been doing your thing over there. Integral Life continues to do its thing over here. We're clearly, we're friends and family, and in some ways partners. And I just absolutely love it. I love the connections between us. And before we go, I want to tell just a real quick funny story of my first experience of Vince as a Bodhisattva. Vince, I don't know if you know, do you probably know the story I'm going to tell?
Oh, no. No, I don't, please.
So this was, again, 17 years ago. This is when, in Integral Institute days, we were basically, a staff of like 25 very energetic 20-something kids in a very, very small office together, which means it got raucous, right? It got crazy. It was the type of thing where like, we were sitting in a chair and there were like 10 of us in a chair sitting together, and just, it was, there was a lot of excitement back then, but it got crazy. And I remember one morning I got out of my bed, and in the middle of the night, I think I had to pee or something, and I stepped on my laptop. It was just on the floor next to my bed, and my laptop broke. I was like, God damn it, I'm just getting this gig with Integral. Like, I can't lose this because like I don't have a machine to work with, right? So I went in the next day into work, and I was all bummed about it. And Vince, without even batting an eye, you said, I've got an extra laptop for you. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. It's like, oh my God. Oh my, this dude's gonna give me this is like 2000, 4 or so. So it's like laptops weren't these like, people weren't just handing out laptops back then. Right?
That's true.
Right?
This one was 7. I think my backup was 7 pound. It was a 7-pound laptop.
No, these were the big boys. That's right. These were the big boys. So you brought it in for me the next day, and I was just so grateful. I was like, this dude's got my back. We barely know each other still, and you've got my back. And you gave me your laptop. And that morning, I'm sitting on the chair, doing a couple things. I literally just opened up. I was playing with the new laptop for about 5 minutes. Then someone else got out of the chair that I was sitting on the edge of, causing the entire chair to flip forward. The laptop falls on the ground, and the screen just shatters. And I'm just sitting looking at it, like a tear rolling down my face, looking at the laptop, looking at Vince. I'm like, oh my God, this dude's gonna hate me right now. He just gave me a laptop and I broke it within 5 minutes. Oh my God. Well, I gotta tell him what happened. I'm like, Vince, I don't know how to tell you this, man, but like, this gift you gave me is ruined already. And dude, it was like, maybe inside you were raging or rolling your eyes or whatever, but your response was just no, dude, it's, shit happens. And it was just this equanimity that I was not in any way expecting. And it's funny because almost 20 years later, I still think about it.
Oh, cool.
About it. So that was my first experience of Vince, not only for graciously giving me a gift that allowed me to continue my employment at the company that I freaking love, but also being so gracious when I took your gift and immediately smashed it on the ground.
So whose laptop did you break after that? You had to find someone.
That's a really good question. I don't actually know where my next laptop was.
I don't think anyone was willing to give you.
No, I think I probably stole one from Hui or something. I don't remember where I got the next one from. But that memory has always stuck with me. So thank you for being such a Bodhisattva to me from the very beginning.
Absolutely, man.
And dude, it was so awesome having you on. I love hanging out with you. I can't wait to start gaming with you guys again. I know you just betrayed me by buying Xboxes. I've got a PlayStation, but we'll figure this out. And we'll start our pwn sessions again. Okay, but dude, it's so awesome to have you here, and I hope you come back and join us for another episode very soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Ryan, any final thoughts, my man?
Nope. Let's get phoning.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you at home for watching us. Again, this has been Inhabit Your Vow with our special guest Vince Horn from Buddhist Geeks, co-founded by Vince and Ryan Olkey here. And it was just such a pleasure to talk to you guys. Have an awesome afternoon.
It was awesome.
Thanks, Corey.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.
Peace.